In February 2026, a CNN investigation revealed that 62 million men visited one website in a single month. This was not for news, this was not for entertainment. This is to watch women being raped while they were unconscious. And in a Telegram group chat, just a normal group chat on your phone, men from all around the world were teaching each other how to do it to their wives. They were talking about which substances to use, how long they last, how to film it, how to sell access to other men for £20 a viewing. Now, the question I keep coming back to isn't how did these men end up there? It's where did they start? Before I go there, I just want to be really clear what this video is and isn't. This is not a man-hating video. Most of the men in your life and in my life are not the men from that Telegram group chat, and that's not the point. The point is this. We live in a culture that has for centuries decided what a woman's body means without ever asking her. It decided her body is a surface, something to be looked at, something to be interpreted, something that communicates intention without her even needing to speak. And that culture, it doesn't just live in the dark corners of the internet. It lives in cinema, in advertising, in courtrooms, and in the question, but what was she wearing? So let's explore that. In 1975, film theorist named Laura Mulvey wrote an essay that changed how we understand images. She called it the male gaze. What she was describing wasn't just men looking at women. She was actually describing something structural, something built into the architecture of how our culture produces images. Think about it like this. In the majority of the films, adverts, music videos, the camera behaves like a man. It shows her being looked at, being desired, being observed, and rarely does the camera turn around and look through the eyes with the same intimacy. So the woman in the frame is the object of the gaze, and the man, and by extension, the audience, is the subject, the one who looks. Here's what's important about this. Mulvey wasn't saying every man who watches a film is consciously objectifying every woman on screen. That's not how this works. Think of it like an accent. So you grow up hearing a particular way of speaking, and after a while, you don't even notice it anymore. It just sounds normal. The male gaze isn't a Western problem. It's a human one. We've all been hearing it our whole lives. Most of us stopped noticing it almost decades ago. And that's exactly what makes it powerful, what brings me to point number one. The male gaze decides who's the subject and who's the object, and for most of cinema history, women have been the objects. The question is, what does that do to us? What does it do to a society that has been steeped in that culture for over hundreds of years of moving image? Because the answer to that question is what connects Laura Mulvey's 1975 essay to a Telegram group chat in 2026. Now let's talk about clothing, because this is where the male gaze becomes really personal, where it stops being film theory and starts being the conversation at the dinner table, in the courtroom, in the comment section. The belief is this: if she dressed like that, she wanted the attention. And I want you to really sit with that belief for a second, because it's fascinating from a psychological perspective. So when you ask women, and research consistently shows this, why they got dressed the way they did in the morning, the answers were remarkably consistent. They dress for themselves, they dress for confidence, to feel capable, to signal who they are, to feel warm, and to feel like the version of themselves they want to feel today. Men barely enter that equation. Now, I'm not saying women don't dress nice for their partners or don't do it in a romantic context. Of course they do, but that is not the default. The default is for herself, for her own body and confidence. So the male gaze tells us a completely different story. It says she dressed for you, and that's not an observation, that's projection. The male gaze doesn't care about her intent. That's the thing. The male gaze is a projection. It takes what it sees and it assigns its own meaning. And if the culture has trained us to read a woman's body as a signal, as an invitation, as a communication, then her clothing becomes evidence of her intent, regardless of what her intent actually means. Because until very recently in the UK, in legal courts, a woman's clothing could be used as evidence against her in a rape trial. The logic being, she wore that, therefore she consented, which takes me to point number 2. The male gaze doesn't just look. It interprets, it assigns meaning, it does so without her permission. So what this indicates is what you wear tells me what you want. Now, once a culture decides that, once that becomes the operating belief, it becomes extraordinarily easy to decide that her desires, her words, her clear refusal are secondary to what her body has already supposedly communicated. So do you see where we get from Mulvey to the courtroom in a single step? There's a study I think about all the time. So in this study, a group of women were asked to try on a swimsuit, just try it on in the changing room on their own. And then they were asked to do a math test. Another group was asked to try on a sweater and they did the exact same test. Now, the swimsuit group scored significantly lower. Not because they were less intelligent, not because the test was harder, but because the moment they put that swimsuit on, part of their brain quietly left the room and started watching them from the outside. This is what psychologists call self-objectification. And it was Barbara Fredrickson who first named it. The moment a woman stops living in her own body and starts monitoring it instead. Think about what that actually means. So she doesn't just get dressed in the morning, she watches herself getting dressed. She doesn't just walk into a room, she observes herself walking into a room. So before she asks, how does this feel? She will ask, how does this look? And I want to be really clear, this is not about vanity, this is not insecurity. That's what happens when you spend a lifetime being shown, not in words, but in every image, every film, every magazine cover you've absorbed that your body is something other people read. You start reading it yourself before they even get a chance. Think of it like a dimmer switch. So your sense of your own inner world, your hunger, your pain, your desire, your gut instincts get slowly, quietly turned down. And the performance, the external monitoring, the watching yourself being watched, that gets turned up. And the consequences are actually not abstract. They show up in concentration, in physical performance, in the ability to feel pleasure, in chronic body shame that has nothing to do with how you actually look. So the male gaze doesn't just change how men see women, it changes how women see themselves. The gaze becomes internal. It colonizes the inside, and that's perhaps the most insidious part of all of this. Because by the time it's internal, a woman can enforce it on herself without a single man in the room. Some of you might be thinking, this is old news. We know the male gaze exists, but we've moved on, haven't we? Let me tell you what happened last month. A man called Jeff Gunther, he's called Therapy Jeff online. He's got around 3 million followers, mostly women, and he posted on Threads asking if there was a hotline for men who were thinking about drugging and raping their wives. Not reporting it, not preventing it, a hotline for the man who wants to do it. He framed this as a mental health need. He then went ahead and made an apology video and he said this on Instagram: moving forward, I will continue reading the actual perpetration research instead of relying on clinical intuition. I'm going to be more careful about which questions I hand to a big audience and which questions I take to a consults group or a colleague first. And when I make content that affects survivors, I am centering them. You can expect more care, more pause before posting, and a stronger commitment to staying within my scope of expertise. This is a licensed therapist whose entire brand is built on women feeling safe. Of course, people make mistakes, and of course, people say the wrong things, but I'm saying is he didn't even clock what he had done. I don't believe the man is a monster, but he's a man so shaped by the logic of the male gaze that he couldn't even see it in himself. And then there's this. The CNN investigated a Telegram group where men were sharing which sedatives to use on their wives, how much, how to film it, how to sell it. 62 million visits to the Motherless sites in 1 month. That's not the dark web. That's not fringe. That's the logic of the male gaze. Her body is mine to access, taken to its end point. The thing connecting Therapy Jeff to the Telegram group is neither of them thought they were doing something wrong. That's the part that should scare us, because this doesn't begin in a chat room. It begins with a belief. I want to tell you a story about Giselle Pelicot. So in France in 2024, her husband was convicted of drugging her and inviting 72 men to rape her for a period of over 10 years. She had no memory of any of it. He had documented everything, and when the trial came, Giselle Pelicot made a decision that I think is one of the most extraordinary acts of courage I have ever read. She waived her right to anonymity. She insisted that the trial be held in public. She looked at the cameras, at the world, and she said, I am not the one who should be ashamed. In a culture that has been telling women through every film, every advert, every courtroom that their bodies communicate their intent, that how they present themselves determines what happens to them, that shame lives within them, Giselle Pelicot turned that gaze around. She said, I'm not the one who should be ashamed. She didn't ask for privacy. She didn't disappear. She made the world look not at her as an object, but at the truth, at the men, at the system, at the belief that made all of it possible. That's not just bravery, that's a direct philosophical challenge to the male gaze. Because the male gaze says women are to be seen on our terms. Giselle Pelicot said, no, you will be seen on mine. You know, I genuinely don't have a clean answer to close this video, and I think that's okay. But what I have is this. I want you to notice this in the films you watch, in the way adverts frame women's bodies. As a woman, in your own internal voice, when you get dressed in the morning, and ask how this looks instead of how does this feel. Notice it in the language used when a woman is assaulted. Notice where the question of what was she wearing still appears, even when we know better. And notice the Giselle Pelicot, the women who refused to absorb the shape that was never theirs to carry. Because if women's bodies were never meant to be owned, if that has always been the truth, why does so much of our culture still act like they were? That's the question I'm leaving you with today. If this resonated, I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you want more of these conversations, a follow means you will not be missing the next video. Take care.